the Lamplighter's final street. The evening had begun its slow descent over the town, not suddenly, but with the kind of gradual dimming that comes so gently one hardly notices the moment when day becomes dusk. The sky held that particular quality of blue, deep and soft at once, that appears only in the hour before true darkness falls. Above the rooftops and chimney pots, the first stars were beginning to prick through the darkening canopy, faint and far away, patient in their appearing. In the narrow streets below, the lamplighter emerged from his small stone cottage at the edge of the square. He moved without hurry, for there was no need for hurry now. The day's work had ended for most of the townspeople. Shutters had been drawn. Doors had been closed and bolted. The sounds of dinner and conversation had faded into the quiet murmur of evening routines. Kettles being filled, children being settled, fires being banked for the night. The lamplighter was an older man, though not so old that his step had lost its steadiness. His face was weathered in the way of those who spend their hours out of doors, creased at the eyes and around the mouth from years of walking the same streets in all weathers. He wore a long coat of dark wool, worn smooth at the elbows and collar, and sturdy boots that had carried him countless miles over these cobblestones. In one hand he carried his ladder, a simple wooden thing, light enough to lift but solid and reliable. In the other he held his taper, a long brass pole with a small flame burning steadily at its tip, protected by a delicate glass shield. This was his final street of the evening. All through the town, the lamps had already been lit, along the market square, down by the canal, through the lanes where the baker and the tailor kept their shops. One by one, he had moved from lamp to lamp, bringing light to each post and corner, watching the warm glow spread and settle. But this street, this last quiet residential lane at the far end of town, had waited patiently for him, as it did every evening. The street was called Millbrook Lane, though there had been no mill and no brook there for as long as anyone could remember. It was simply a name that had settled into place, soft with age and repetition. The lane ran straight and narrow between two rows of terraced houses, their fronts all facing one another across the cobbled way. The houses were built of pale stone that seemed to hold the last of the daylight even as the shadows deepened. Each had a small front step, worn smooth by generations of footfalls, and a single window on each floor, dark now behind drawn curtains. The lamplighter paused at the entrance to the lane and set down his ladder gently, resting it against the first lamp post. The post stood perhaps 12 feet high, made of black iron worked in a simple pattern, with a glass-paned lantern at its top. The glass was clear and clean. He had wiped each lamp himself only 2 days before, and through it, the empty lamp chamber waited for its flame. He positioned his ladder carefully, testing its feet against the cobblestones to be certain of their grip. The stones here were old and smooth, fitted together with such precision that rainwater ran between them without pooling. In the fading light, they gleamed faintly, still holding the warmth of the day's sun. The lamplighter climbed slowly, one hand on the ladder, the other holding his taper steady. There was no rushing in this work. Each step was deliberate, each movement economical and sure. At the top of the ladder, he reached the lamp's small access door and opened it with a practiced motion. The hinges made no sound. He kept them oiled and attended to. Inside the lamp, the wick sat coiled and ready, its white cotton fibers clean and trimmed. He brought the flame of his taper to the wick and held it there, steady and patient. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wick caught, the flame transferring from one to the other with a soft breath of light. The lamp bloomed into life. It was not a sudden brightness, but a gentle unfurling of warm yellow light that spread outward from the wick, filled the glass chamber, and began to cast its glow downward onto the cobblestones below. The light reached the fronts of the houses, touching the pale stone with amber warmth. It stretched along the street in a soft pool, pushing back the shadows without violence, simply making a space where light could rest. The lamplighter closed the lamp's access door and descended the ladder, counting each rung as he always did, 8 steps down to solid ground. He lifted his ladder and moved to the next post, perhaps 30 feet along the lane. His footsteps made a quiet sound on the cobblestones, a rhythmic tapping that echoed faintly between the houses. In the stillness of the evening, it was almost like a heartbeat, steady and calm. Behind the windows of the houses, lives were settling into their evening rhythms. In one home, a kettle began to whistle, the sound carrying faintly through the glass before someone lifted it from the heat. In another, a cat appeared briefly on a windowsill, watching the lamplighter pass before turning away to some domestic concern of its own. There were no voices, no sounds of activity, only the deep, comfortable quiet of a street preparing itself for night. The second lamp post stood in the same simple style as the first, its black iron smooth and cool to the touch. The lamplighter set his ladder once more, climbed once more, opened the small door with the same careful attention. The wick inside this lamp was ready, as they always were. He kept them all trimmed and tended, replaced them when they grew too short, cleaned away any soot that gathered on the glass. It was not complicated work, but it required consistency and care, and these things the lamplighter had in abundance. The taper's flame touched the wick. The wick accepted the flame. The lamp lit, its light spreading to meet the glow of the first lamp, the two circles of warmth beginning to overlap along the center of the lane. Where they met, the light seemed to deepen, to become somehow more present, as if two small suns had decided to share the same sky. Down the ladder again. 8 steps, one after another. Lift the ladder. Walk forward. The rhythm was as familiar as breathing, and just as natural. There was no thought required, no decision to be made. The body knew the movements. The hands knew the weight of the ladder and the taper. The feet knew the spacing of the cobblestones and the slight slope of the lane as it followed the gentle contour of the hill. The evening air was cool against the lamplighter's face, carrying with it the sense of the day's ending, bread from a kitchen somewhere nearby, the faint sweetness of flowers in a window box, the clean smell of stone releasing the sun's heat back into the growing darkness. There was no wind, only the softest movement of air, enough to make the lamp flames shiver very slightly behind their protective glass. Above, the sky continued its transformation. The deep blue had darkened further, becoming something closer to indigo, and the stars were more numerous now, forming their familiar patterns across the vault of heaven. The lamplighter did not look up at them. He had seen them countless times, knew their positions and their seasons, but he was aware of them nonetheless, aware of the way they marked the turning of the hours and the steady progression of the night. The third lamp post waited ahead, and he moved toward it with the same unhurried grace. The third lamp post stood before a house with a blue-painted door, faded now to a soft gray-blue by years of sun and weather. The lamplighter had known this door when it was freshly painted, had watched it age into its current gentle shade, and supposed he would see it painted again someday, or perhaps not. These things happened in their own time, and there was a comfort in that, in the way some things changed slowly and others remained constant. He set his ladder against the post, and as he did so, a small sound reached his ears, the distant chiming of a clock from somewhere deeper in the town. 6 chimes, clear and unhurried, marking the hour. The sound carried easily through the still air, reaching down Millbrook Lane and then fading away again, leaving only its echo in memory. 6 o'clock. The proper time for the final lamps to be lit, for the day to officially surrender to the evening. Up the ladder once more, the lamplighter climbed. His hands moved with their accustomed certainty, opening the access door, bringing the taper to meet the waiting wick. The flame transferred as it always did, that small miracle of light passing from one source to another, multiplying rather than dividing. This lamp caught perhaps a moment more quickly than the others, the wick being newer, more eager in its burning. The light bloomed and steadied, finding its proper brightness, and the pool of illumination spread to join those of the first 2 lamps. Now 3 circles of warm light graced Millbrook Lane, overlapping and blending, creating a gentle gradient of brightness that pushed back the gathering dusk. The cobblestones glowed warmly where the light touched them most directly, and faded into softer shadow between the posts. It was not daylight, would never seek to be daylight, but rather something gentler, something that acknowledged the night while offering a kind hand to guide any who might need to walk these streets. The lamplighter descended and moved onward. His shadow, cast by the lamps behind him, stretched long and thin ahead of him on the cobblestones, a dark companion that moved when he moved, paused when he paused. He paid it no mind. Shadows were simply the other side of light, neither good nor bad, simply present and necessary. The 4th lamp post stood at a slight bend in the lane, where Millbrook curved perhaps 5 degrees to the left to follow the line of an old property boundary long since built over. The lamplighter knew this curve without thinking, adjusted his path automatically, arrived at the post precisely where he intended. The ladder found its place. The climb commenced. From somewhere nearby came the sound of water being poured, perhaps a basin being filled for washing, or a watering can being readied for a small indoor garden. The sound was domestic and comforting, a reminder that behind these quiet walls, life continued its gentle routines. The lamplighter appreciated these small sounds. They were the evidence of the town's peaceful existence, the soft proof that all was well, that people were safe and tended and going about their evening preparations. The fourth wick received its flame with the same quiet acceptance as all the others. The light grew and settled, adding its glow to the lengthening chain of illumination. The lamplighter could see, from his elevated position at the top of the ladder, the 3 lamps he had already lit stretching back toward the entrance of the lane, their warm light creating a corridor of welcome and safety. Ahead, the unlighted lamps stood in patient darkness, waiting their turn, knowing with certainty that their turn would come. Down again. The ladder lifted. The feet carried him forward. The routine continued, as unchanging as the turning of the earth itself, as reliable as the rising of the sun and the setting of the moon. There was something deeply restful in this predictability, in knowing exactly what would come next, in having no surprises to navigate or uncertainties to resolve. The work was simple and clear, and in its simplicity lay a kind of profound peace. The 5th lamp post stood before a house where an elderly woman lived alone. The lamplighter knew her slightly, had exchanged greetings with her on occasion when she sat on her front step in the afternoon sun, but he did not think of her now as he lit her lamp. His thoughts, such as they were, remained absorbed in the work itself, in the careful placement of the ladder, the steady climb, the patient transfer of flame. Each lamp received his full attention in its moment, and then he moved on to the next, giving it the same complete focus. This lamp's glass was particularly clear, having been cleaned most recently, and when the flame caught, the light seemed almost crystalline in its purity. It cast sharp-edged shadows beneath the lamp itself before the light diffused and softened in its spread across the cobblestones. The lamplighter observed this with quiet satisfaction. Clean glass made for better light, and better light made for safer streets, and safer streets made for a more peaceful town. It was a simple chain of cause and effect, but one that mattered. As he descended this ladder, the lamplighter became aware of a slight ache in his shoulders. Not pain, precisely, but the gentle reminder of muscles used steadily throughout the evening. He had lit perhaps 40 lamps already tonight, before arriving at Millbrook Lane, and the accumulated effect of lifting the ladder, climbing, descending, and walking had made itself known. But it was not an unpleasant sensation. It was the ache of honest work, of effort expended in the service of something worthwhile. He acknowledged it without concern and continued on. The 6th lamp post waited, and with it came the realization that he was now approaching the midpoint of the lane. Millbrook Lane held 11 lamps in total, strung along its length like luminous pearls on a dark thread. 6 would light the first half, 5 the second, creating a gentle symmetry that pleased the eye and served the practical purpose of ensuring no stretch of the street lay too long in shadow. The ladder found its position. The climb began. Below, the cobblestones gleamed with reflected lamplight, and the lamplighter's shadow fell across them, broken and multiplied by the several light sources now burning behind him. The air at this slightly elevated height was fractionally cooler than at ground level, and he felt it on his face and hands, a gentle touch of evening bringing its slow chill. The 6th wick took the flame, and the 6th lamp joined its companions in their quiet vigil. The light spread and mingled with the others, creating now a nearly continuous glow along the first half of Millbrook Lane. From this vantage point, the lamplighter could see how the light transformed the street, bringing out the texture of the stone, creating depth and shadow, making the familiar somehow new while remaining completely itself. He descended once more, his boots finding each rung with practiced accuracy. At the bottom, he paused for a moment, not from fatigue, but simply to allow the moment to settle. This pause was not part of his usual routine, but sometimes a pause felt necessary, felt right. He stood with one hand resting on the ladder, the other holding his taper steady, and simply breathed the evening air and observed the work he had accomplished so far. The silence of the lane was nearly complete now. The earlier sounds of kettles and water and domestic activity had faded. The people of Millbrook Lane were settling deeper into their evening routines, moving toward rest, drawing inward. Lights showed in a few upper windows where bedrooms were being prepared, but these were warm yellow glows behind curtains, private and self-contained. The street itself belonged to the lamplighter now, to him, and to the steady burning of the lamps he had lit. He lifted his ladder again and moved forward, past the midpoint of the lane now, entering the second half of his journey. The seventh lamp post stood before a house with a small front garden, hardly more than a few feet of space between the door and the street, but enough for someone to have planted lavender bushes. Even now, in the evening coolness, the faint scent of lavender reached him, that clean herbal fragrance that spoke of summer days and careful tending. The ladder rose against the post. The lamplighter climbed. The routine continued, unchanging and steady, a meditation in motion, a prayer made of simple actions repeated with attention and care. There was no need for words, no need for conscious thought. The body knew. The hands knew. The flame knew what it must do when brought near to the waiting wick. The seventh lamp lit with a soft flutter, the flame establishing itself and then settling into its steady burn. The light joined the others, pushing the corridor of illumination further down the lane, claiming more of the darkness for gentle visibility. Only 4 lamps remained now, 4 more posts to visit, for more flames to light, and then the work would be complete, and Millbrook Lane would rest in its full evening glory, tended and safe. Down the ladder, lift, walk forward. The rhythm had become almost musical now, a slow tempo that matched the beating of his heart and the drawing of his breath. There was no separation between the lamplighter and his work. They had become one continuous action, flowing and unbroken. The 8th lamp post stood at a place where the lane widened slightly, creating a small space where 2 carts might pass one another without difficulty. In the daylight hours, this was where neighbors sometimes paused to exchange a few words, where children might gather for a moment's play before being called home. But now, in the gathering darkness, the space lay empty and still, waiting to be filled with light. The lamplighter set his ladder with the same careful attention he had given to all the others. The cobblestones here were slightly larger than elsewhere in the lane, old stones that might have been part of some earlier construction, repurposed and laid down again when Millbrook Lane was first paved. They had a different texture beneath his boots, smoother in some places, more worn in others, carrying the record of countless footsteps pressed into their surface over years and decades. As he climbed toward the 8th lamp, a soft breeze stirred for the first time that evening. It was barely more than a breath of air, but enough to make the flame of his taper waver slightly within its glass protection. The lamplighter steadied his hand by instinct, keeping the flame sheltered and safe. The breeze brought with it a coolness from somewhere beyond the town, perhaps from the fields that lay to the east, or from the river that wound its way through the valley below. It carried the scent of grass and earth, clean and simple. The 8th wick received its flame, and the 8th lamp added its light to the growing constellation. The breeze touched this flame too, making it dance momentarily before settling into its steady burn. Through the clear glass, the light spread outward and downward, illuminating the widened space in the lane, casting soft shadows from a water pump that stood at the edge of the cobbles. The pump was another relic of earlier times, still functional but rarely used now that the houses had their own indoor plumbing. Still it remained, a silent witness to the changing years. The lamplighter descended and stood for a moment beside the pump, his free hand resting briefly on its iron handle. The metal was cool and slightly damp with evening condensation. He had filled countless buckets from this pump in his younger days, when he had first come to live in this town, when these streets were newer to him and each lamp post was still being learned and memorized. That had been long ago, but the pump remained, unchanged and unchanging, a fixed point in the flowing river of time. He moved on to the 9th lamp post, which stood before a house with a tidy front step and a brass knocker on the door in the shape of a lion's head. The knocker gleamed faintly in the lamplight from behind, catching and reflecting the warm glow. Someone polished that knocker regularly, the lamplighter knew, keeping it bright and clean. It was the kind of small detail that spoke of care and attention, of someone who took pride in their home and its appearance. The ladder found its place against the 9th post. The climb began, 8 steps upward into the deepening night. The sky above had darkened considerably now, the indigo giving way to a deeper blue-black, and the stars were fully visible, scattered across the heavens in their thousands. A thin crescent moon hung low on the western horizon, pale and delicate, adding its own faint light to the evening. The lamplighter did not pause to admire these celestial lights. His work was with the earthbound lamps, the human lights that brought comfort and guidance to the streets below. The 9th flame caught and held, burning steadily in its glass chamber. The light spread and joined with the others, creating now an almost unbroken chain of illumination stretching back along 3/4 of Millbrook Lane. Only 2 lamps remained in darkness, waiting at the far end of the street, patient in their unlit state. As the lamplighter descended from the 9th lamp, he He heard a sound that had been absent until now, the soft ticking of a clock from inside one of the nearby houses. The sound reached him through a partially open window, the regular mechanical heartbeat of a timepiece marking the seconds and minutes with precise, unvarying rhythm. Tick, 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 a steady pulse that seemed to harmonize with his own heartbeat, with the rhythm of his footsteps on the cobblestones, with the entire slow cadence of the evening. He walked toward the 10th lamp post, passing through pools of light and shadow, his own shadow multiplying and shifting as he moved relative to the various lamps behind him. The effect was hypnotic in its way, the constantly changing patterns of darkness and illumination, the way the light transformed the familiar street into something slightly mysterious, slightly other, while remaining completely itself. The 10th lamp post stood before a house with deep-set windows and a front step worn into a gentle depression at its center. Someone had placed a small stone pot beside the step, planted with herbs, perhaps rosemary or thyme, and the lamplighter could smell the faint herbal fragrance as he positioned his ladder. These small touches of green life, these modest attempts at beauty and cultivation, they moved something in him, though he would have struggled to name the feeling. They spoke of hope, perhaps, or of care, or simply of the human desire to surround oneself with growing things. Up the ladder he climbed, for the 10th time this evening on Millbrook Lane, for perhaps the 40th or 50th time this evening in total. His legs knew the motion, his arms knew the balance, his hands knew exactly how to hold the taper steady while opening the lamp's small door. There was no fumbling, no uncertainty, no wasted motion. Everything was smooth and practiced and sure. The 10th wick took the flame with quiet eagerness, and the 10th lamp blazed into gentle life. The light poured downward, illuminating the herbs in their pot, catching the texture of the worn step, spreading across the cobblestones to meet and mingle with the light from the 9th lamp. The overlap of illumination here was particularly smooth, creating a gradual transition rather than distinct circles, and the effect was soothing to the eye. The lamplighter descended his ladder for the 10th time, counting the rungs as always, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, until his boots met the solid ground once more. He lifted his ladder, lighter now with familiarity, or perhaps he was simply lighter himself, unburdened by the anticipation of work and carrying only the satisfaction of work nearly completed. One lamp remained. The 11th and final lamp post stood at the far end of Millbrook Lane, where the street ended in a small cul-de-sac. Beyond this point, the town gave way to open land, fields and hedgerows, and eventually the rising slopes of the hills that cradled the valley. The last lamp served as a marker, a gentle indication of where the town concluded and the countryside began, a beacon for anyone returning from the fields or the hills as darkness fell. But the lamplighter did not hurry toward this final lamp. To hurry would be to disrespect the work, to suggest that one lamp mattered less than another, or that completion was more important than the careful attention each lamp deserved. And so he walked at the same steady pace he had maintained throughout the entire evening, his footsteps echoing softly in the lane, his shadow stretching before him now, cast by all 10 lamps burning behind him. The houses here at the end of the lane were quiet, their windows dark behind drawn curtains. The people inside were settling into their evening activities, reading, perhaps, or mending, or simply sitting in comfortable silence as the day's work faded into memory. The lamplighter could imagine these scenes, having glimpsed them countless times over the years, the interior warmth and light, the soft glow of hearth fires and reading lamps, the gentle domesticity of families at rest. He reached the final lamp post and set down his ladder with a soft scraping sound against the cobblestones. The post stood slightly taller than the others, or perhaps it only seemed so because it stood alone here at the end of the lane, with no buildings immediately behind it. Beyond it, the darkness of the open fields pressed close, deep and complete, unbroken by any human light. The lamplighter positioned his ladder carefully, checking its stability with particular attention. This last lamp, this final light, somehow mattered more than the others, though he could not have explained why. Perhaps it was simply the satisfaction of completion, or perhaps it was the symbolic weight of bringing light to the very edge of the town, of pushing back the darkness one final time before his work was done. He began to climb, his hands gripping the ladder's smooth wooden rails, his feet finding each rung with practiced certainty. Below him, Millbrook Lane stretched away, glowing with the warm light of 10 lamps, a corridor of gentle illumination that seemed almost to float in the surrounding darkness. It was beautiful, he thought, though the thought was wordless, more of a feeling than a conscious observation. It was beautiful, and it was good, and it was right. At the top of the ladder, The lamplighter paused for a breath, longer than he had paused at any of the other lamps. From this elevated position, he could see the entirety of Millbrook Lane spread below him, the 10 lights burning in their steady rhythm, the cobblestones gleaming softly, the rows of quiet houses on either side. The lane looked peaceful and complete, wanting only this final lamp to reach its full expression of evening readiness. He opened the access door to the lamp with his usual care, the small hinges moving smoothly and silently. Inside, the wick waited, coiled and trimmed, fresh and ready. He had replaced this wick only a week ago, he remembered, during one of his maintenance rounds. It was good cotton, tightly woven, the kind that would burn steadily and cleanly for many weeks before needing replacement. The lamplighter brought his taper close, watching as the small flame at its tip approached the waiting wick. For a moment, the two flames existed separately, the taper's flame dancing slightly in the open air, the wick still dark and dormant. Then they touched, and the flame spread, transferring from the taper to the wick in that ancient and simple miracle of fire sharing itself, becoming more rather than less. The 11th lamp caught and bloomed, its light spreading outward in all directions. It illuminated the cul-de-sac, touching the cobblestones with warm amber light. It reached toward the fields beyond, though it could not penetrate far into that deep darkness. It joined with the light of the 10th lamp, creating a final pool of illumination that completed the chain running the full length of Millbrook Lane. The lamplighter closed the access door and began his descent. 8 steps down, one after another, his body knowing each movement so completely that thought was unnecessary. At the bottom, he stood for a long moment with his hand resting on the ladder, looking back along the lane he had just lit. The view from here was particularly fine, the gentle curve of the street, the regular spacing of the lamp posts, the warm glow spreading from each light source and mingling with the others to create a continuous river of illumination. It was complete. The work was done. Millbrook Lane was lit for the night, tended and safe, ready to offer its gentle guidance to anyone who might need to walk its length in the hours of darkness. But the lamplighter did not immediately gather his ladder and depart. Instead, he stood quietly at the end of the lane, simply being present with the completion of his work. This was not vanity or pride. Those were not emotions that troubled him. It was rather a form of acknowledgement, a moment of quiet respect for the work itself and for the town it served. The lamps would burn through the night, their flames steady and patient, asking nothing, simply giving their light freely to all who needed it. The evening air had grown cooler still, and the lamplighter became aware of it now in his stillness, aware of the way it touched his face and hands with gentle chill. The breeze that had stirred earlier had faded again, leaving only the softest movement of air, barely enough to be called a breeze at all. The lamp flames behind their protective glass burned straight and true, unwavering. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of a dog barking, 2 or 3 short barks, and then silence. The sound carried clearly through the still air, reaching Millbrook Lane and then fading away again, absorbed by the darkness and the distance. It was not an alarmed bark, not a warning, simply a dog announcing its presence to the night, perhaps, or responding to some sound or scent that only a dog could detect. The lamplighter finally bent and lifted his ladder, settling it against his shoulder in the carrying position he had used for so many years. The wood was smooth against his coat, worn to a satiny finish by countless hours of contact with fabric and hands. In his other hand, he held his taper, its flames still burning steadily at the tip, though there were no more wicks to light this evening. He would extinguish it when he returned to his cottage, carefully and safely, banking the flame for tomorrow's lighting round. He began to walk back along Millbrook Lane, moving through the light he had created, passing beneath each lamp in turn. His footsteps sounded clearly on the cobblestones, a steady rhythm that seemed to measure the evening itself. As he walked, he glanced up at each lamp, checking with his experienced eye that all was well, that the flames were steady, that the glass was uncracked, that the posts stood straight and true. All was as it should be. The lamps burned with quiet faithfulness, asking nothing, simply performing their gentle duty. Past the 10th lamp, past the 9th, past the 8th lamp at the widened place in the lane where the old pump stood. The lamplighter's shadow preceded him now, cast by the lamps behind him, stretching long and thin ahead of him on the cobbles. He moved through alternating zones of brighter light and softer shadow, the rhythm of illumination as regular as breathing, as constant as the beating of his heart. Past the 7th lamp with its lavender bushes, past the 6th that marked the midpoint of the lane. He was retracing his steps now, following the same path he had walked while lighting, but the experience was different. Before, the lane had been gradually revealing itself as each new lamp was lit. Now it lay complete and fully illuminated, offering itself entirely to his view, holding nothing back. Past the fifth lamp, past the fourth at the slight bend in the lane. A cat appeared briefly in one of the windows, a dark silhouette against the warmer interior light, watching him pass with the patient curiosity cats bring to their observation of human activities. The lamplighter did not wave or acknowledge the cat. He simply continued his steady progress, walking the lane as he walked it every evening, a familiar presence to the residents of these houses, as much a part of the evening routine as the lighting of the lamps themselves. Past the third lamp before the house with the blue-gray door. Past the second lamp, past the first. The entrance to Millbrook Lane was before him now, the place where this quiet residential street joined the somewhat busier thoroughfare that led toward the town square. Here the lighting was different, lamps on both sides of the street, more closely spaced, creating a brighter and more public illumination. But that was appropriate for a main street, where more people might walk, where shops stayed open a bit later, where a greater degree of light was both necessary and welcome. The lamplighter paused at the entrance to Millbrook Lane and looked back one final time. The 11 lamps burned steadily, creating a corridor of warm light that stretched away into the distance, fading at the far end where the lane terminated in its small cul-de-sac. The houses on either side stood quiet and peaceful, their windows dark or showing only the faintest glow from within. The street was at rest, settled into its evening state, watched over by the faithful lamps. A sense of satisfaction settled over the lamplighter, quiet and undramatic. This was not the fierce satisfaction of a great accomplishment or a difficult task completed against odds. It was rather the gentle satisfaction of work done well, of duty fulfilled with care and attention, of contributing one's small part to the smooth functioning of the community. Tomorrow evening he would return and do the same work again, and the evening after that, and the evening after that, for as long as his body remained strong enough to carry the ladder and climb toward the lamps. He turned away from Millbrook Lane and began walking toward his cottage, his ladder balanced on his shoulder, his taper's flame still burning steadily in its brass housing. Behind him, the 11 lamps of Millbrook Lane continued their vigil, asking nothing, offering everything, light in the darkness, guidance for any who might need it, a gentle reminder that even in the deepest night, care and attention and human effort could push back the shadows and create spaces of warmth and safety. The lamplighter's footsteps faded as he walked away, growing quieter and more distant, until they could no longer be heard at all. But the lamps remained, burning steadily, faithfully, patiently, holding their light through all the hours of darkness that lay ahead. The night deepened over Millbrook Lane, settling in like a familiar guest who knows the house and requires no guidance. The 11 lamps continued their steady burning, their flames unwavering behind the protective glass, casting their pools of warm light onto the cobblestones below. The street rested in this illumination, peaceful and still, wrapped in the particular quality of silence that comes when a place has fully surrendered to evening. In the house beside the first lamp, a light appeared briefly in an upper window, a candle being carried from one room to another, perhaps, or a lamp being brought to a bedside table. The light moved slowly across the window, paused, and then was extinguished, leaving only darkness behind the curtains. Someone was retiring for the night, beginning the final preparations for sleep, drawing the day to its close. The temperature continued its gradual decline, the warmth accumulated during the daylight hours slowly dissipating into the clear night sky. The cobblestones, which had held the sun's heat for hours after sunset, were finally releasing it, growing cool to the touch, their surface temperature dropping degree by imperceptible degree. If anyone had been present to observe, they might have noticed the faintest wisps of vapor rising where the cooling stones met the slightly warmer air above them, but the effect was so subtle as to be almost invisible. The lamp flames themselves created small updrafts of warm air, columns of heat rising through the glass chambers and out through the ventilation slots at the top of each lantern. These warm currents rose into the cooler air above, creating minute turbulences, tiny weather systems that affected nothing and no one but existed nonetheless, obedient to the laws of heat and air and movement. Along the edges of the lane, where the cobblestones met the stone steps of the houses, small shadows gathered and pooled. These were the places the lamplight could not quite reach, the small corners and crevices that remained in darkness even with all 11 lamps burning. But these shadows were gentle ones, holding no menace or threat, simply marking the natural boundaries of where light ended and darkness began. They gave depth and dimension to the scene, preventing the lamplight from becoming flat and uniform, allowing the eye to perceive texture and distance and the subtle variations in the stone surfaces. In the house beside the third lamp, a clock chimed the half-hour, 6:30 now, the evening still relatively young, though the darkness made it seem later. The sound was muffled by walls and windows, reaching the street as a soft, almost dreamy sequence of notes, more felt than heard. The chimes faded quickly, absorbed by the night, leaving no echo behind. A small moth appeared near the seventh lamp, drawn by the light as moths have been drawn since humans first began to burn fires against the darkness. It fluttered around the glass, seeking entrance to the light source itself, its wings beating rapidly as it circled and searched. The lamp, well designed and properly sealed, offered no opening large enough for the moth to enter. After several minutes of persistent but futile effort, the moth flew away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the lamplight, seeking perhaps some other flame, some other light to spiral around in its mysterious, ancient dance. The iron lamp posts themselves stood perfectly still, as they always stood, as they would continue to stand through all the hours of night and all the hours of day, year after year. The metal held the day's accumulated warmth more stubbornly than the stones, releasing it more slowly, and if someone had placed a hand against one of the posts, they would have felt a residual warmth there, a gentle heat that spoke of sun and afternoon and the slow thermal patience of iron. Near the old water pump at the widened place in the lane, a small puddle had formed where water had dripped from the pump's spout earlier in the day. The puddle was perhaps 6 inches across, no more, and very shallow, but it caught and held the reflection of the eighth lamp, creating a small mirror of light on the ground. The reflection wavered very slightly as the air moved across the water's surface, causing the mirrored flame to dance and shimmer, while the real flame above burned steady and true. The houses along Millbrook Lane continued their quiet evening routines behind their walls and windows. In one home, the sound of footsteps moved across a floor overhead, someone walking from one room to another, performing some small task or chore before settling for the night. In another house, a door closed softly, the latch clicking into place with a gentle sound that barely reached the street. These were the sounds of domesticity, of lives being lived in peace and safety, protected and guided by the lamplight outside. The crescent moon, which had hung low on the western horizon earlier, had now set completely, slipping below the edge of the world and taking its pale light with it. The stars remained, growing brighter as the last traces of twilight faded from the sky. They wheeled slowly overhead in their eternal patterns, marking the hours with their steady progression across the heavens. The constellation that the townspeople called the Ploughman stood high in the southern sky, its stars bright and clear, while toward the north, the circumpolar stars turned their endless circle around the fixed point of the pole star. The lamplight could not reach the stars, of course, nor did it seek to. Its purpose was humble and earthbound, to illuminate these cobblestones, these house fronts, this single lane in this single town. The stars could tend to themselves, burning their unimaginable fires across unimaginable distances. The lamps of Millbrook Lane had simpler work to do, and they did it faithfully and well. A faint sound drifted from somewhere beyond the town, perhaps a fox calling in the fields, or an owl hunting along the hedgerows, or simply the wind moving through distant trees. The sound was too far away and too indistinct to identify with certainty, but it served as a reminder that beyond the orderly streets and lit lanes of the town, the natural world continued its ancient patterns, unconcerned with human schedules or human illumination. In the house beside the ninth lamp, with the lion's head knocker on its door, a final light was extinguished in a downstairs room. The house settled into complete darkness, its residents having completed their evening activities and retired for the night. The building itself seemed to relax slightly, to settle more firmly into its foundations, as if the absence of movement and activity within allowed it to rest more completely. The 11th lamp, at the far end of the lane where the town gave way to open country, continued to mark that boundary, its light reaching out toward the fields but unable to penetrate far into that deeper darkness. The countryside absorbed the light, swallowed it, made it insignificant against the vast darkness of hills and valleys and distant horizons. But the lamp did not falter or dim. It burned with the same steady faithfulness as all the others, offering what light it could, marking the edge of human habitation with its warm glow. The cobblestones of Millbrook Lane, now fully cooled, had taken on a slight sheen where the lamplight touched them, a subtle gleaming that emphasized their texture and their age. Each stone was slightly different from its neighbors, different in size, in shape, in the way it had been cut and fitted, in the pattern of wear on its surface. Together they formed a coherent whole, a street that had served its purpose for generations, and would serve for generations more, patient and durable and unchanging in all the ways that mattered. Time continued its steady flow, unmarked except by the occasional chiming of distant clocks and the slow wheeling of the stars. 7 o'clock passed, though no one in Millbrook Lane noted its passing. The houses stood quiet. The lamps burned steady. The night deepened and settled, wrapping the lane in its gentle embrace. A bat flew overhead, passing through the space above the street in swift, erratic flight, hunting insects in the darkness. Its path took it through the light of several lamps, and for brief moments it was visible, a small, dark shape moving with incredible agility, changing direction in mid-flight, guided by senses far beyond human understanding. Then it was gone again, swallowed by the darkness beyond the lamplight, its hunt continuing in spaces where human eyes could not follow. The night air carried the scent of flowers now, night-blooming stock from someone's garden, perhaps, or Nicotiana releasing its fragrance in the darkness. The smell was sweet and clean, mixing with the faint herbal scent of the rosemary and thyme growing near the 10th lamp. These fragrances drifted along the lane, subtle and shifting, present one moment and gone the next, as unpredictable as memory. In the house beside the 5th lamp, where the elderly woman lived alone, a light appeared briefly in a window and then disappeared again. Perhaps she had risen for a glass of water, or to check that a door was locked, or simply in response to some small restlessness that had interrupted her rest. The light's appearance and disappearance took only moments, and then the house returned to darkness, settling back into the stillness of sleep. The 11th lamp continued its vigil at the end of the lane, burning faithfully through the deepening night. The night grew deeper still, moving past the early evening hours into that quieter time when most of the town had surrendered fully to rest. The lamps of Millbrook Lane burned on, their flames steady and patient, neither growing nor diminishing, simply maintaining their constant glow with the reliable rhythm of well-tended wicks and clean-burning oil. The silence had become more complete now, more absolute. The occasional sounds of domestic activity that had marked the earlier evening had ceased entirely. No footsteps crossed floors, no doors opened or closed. No water ran in pipes. The houses had settled into the deep stillness of sleep, their residents dreaming behind closed curtains, their breathing slow and steady, their bodies at rest. The lamplight played across the stone fronts of the houses, creating subtle shadows in the mortar lines between the blocks, emphasizing the texture and solidity of the construction. These houses had stood for generations, would stand for generations more, their walls thick and strong, built to last by craftsmen who had taken pride in their work. The stones had been quarried from hills not far from the town, cut and shaped and fitted together with care and skill, and they bore the marks of that work still. The slight variations in color, the occasional tool mark, the way certain blocks had weathered differently than others over the decades. A slight breeze stirred again, more noticeable now in the stillness than it would have been earlier when other sounds and movements might have masked it. The breeze moved down the length of Millbrook Lane, following the corridor created by the houses on either side, and as it passed each lamp, the flames shivered very slightly behind their glass protection. The movement was minimal, the glass shielded the flames well, but it was there, a gentle oscillation that showed the flames were living things, responsive to the air around them, not merely mechanical sources of light. The breeze carried with it the scent of the open fields beyond the town, earth and grass and growing things, the smell of the countryside at night. It was a clean scent, uncomplicated, speaking of wide spaces and dark skies and the ancient rhythms of land and season. The breeze mixed this wild scent with the more domestic smells of the lane, the herbs in their pots, the stone and mortar of the buildings, the faint residue of coal smoke from chimneys where fires had burned earlier in the evening. Near the 4th lamp, a spider had spun its web between the post and a nearby railing, creating a delicate architecture of silk threads that caught and held the lamplight. The web was intricate and beautiful, each strand placed with mathematical precision, the whole structure forming a spiral pattern that seemed almost too perfect to be the work of a small creature acting on instinct alone. Tiny drops of moisture had condensed on the silk threads, forming beads of water that gleamed like tiny jewels in the amber light. The spider itself sat at the center of its web, motionless and patient, waiting for the vibrations that would signal prey caught in the sticky strands. It was a small spider, dark and compact, perfectly suited to its work of hunting in the night. The spider paid no attention to the lamp or its light, These were simply features of the environment, neither helpful nor harmful to its purposes. The web was what mattered, and the waiting, and the certainty that eventually something would fly into the carefully constructed trap. The clock that had chimed earlier sounded again, marking 8 o'clock with 8 clear notes. The sound reached Millbrook Lane as it had before, slightly muffled by distance and walls, but still distinct enough to count. 8 chimes, and then silence, the last note hanging in the air for a moment before fading away. 8 o'clock, the evening fully established now, the night extending before and behind, no longer new but not yet old. In the small space between two of the cobblestones, a beetle emerged from whatever small crevice it called home, its dark carapace gleaming as it caught the light from the nearest lamp. The beetle moved with the slow, methodical gait characteristic of its kind, its legs working in their precise sequence, carrying it across the vast expanse of stone, vast to the beetle, at least, though no more than a few feet in human terms. The beetle had some destination in mind, some purpose known only to itself, and it pursued that purpose with single-minded determination, following a path invisible to any observer. The temperature continued its slow decline. The coolness was more pronounced now, enough that someone standing in the street would have wanted a coat or a shawl, would have been aware of the chill touching their face and hands. But there was no one standing in the street. Millbrook Lane was empty of human presence, given over entirely to the lamps and the night and the small creatures that made their home in the shadows and crevices of the built environment. The house beside the 6th lamp, the one at the midpoint of the lane, showed a light in its upper window for a brief moment. Through the curtains, a shape moved, indistinct and shadowy. Perhaps someone unable to sleep, looking out at the night, or a parent checking on a sleeping child, or simply someone drawn to the window by some small sound or movement outside. The figure paused at the window for several long moments, looking out at the lamplit street, and then withdrew. The light remained a moment longer, and then was extinguished, leaving the window dark once more. What had that person seen, looking out at the street? The lamplighter would have wondered, had he been there to see the figure at the window. Perhaps they had seen the peaceful regularity of the lamps, the gentle pools of light along the lane. Perhaps they had found some comfort in that sight, some reassurance in the faithful burning of the flames. Or perhaps they had been too preoccupied with their own thoughts to really see the street at all, their eyes directed outward, but their attention turned inward, focused on whatever private concern had brought them from their bed to the window. The 11th lamp, at the far end of the lane where the cobblestones gave way to packed earth and grass, continued to mark the boundary between town and country. Beyond its circle of light, the fields stretched away into darkness, invisible but present, their vastness implied by the quality of the darkness itself. A deeper, more complete absence of light than could exist within the town, where lamps and windows and street lamps and the reflected glow from walls and pavement all combined to push back the night. In those dark fields, life continued in ways the town dwellers rarely thought about. Mice moved through the grass, following their small mouse purposes. Foxes hunted along the hedgerows. Owls watched from fence posts and trees, their extraordinary eyes gathering what little light existed and transforming it into clear vision. The countryside at night was not empty or dormant. It was alive and active, full of movement and purpose, simply following rhythms different from the human rhythms that govern the town. But Millbrook Lane knew nothing of these rural activities. Its concerns were urban, domestic, focused on the human scale of existence. The lamps illuminated human streets for human purposes, creating human spaces of safety and visibility. The wild darkness beyond the 11th lamp was acknowledged but not embraced. It was the other, the outside, the realm that lay beyond the ordered comfort of the town. A cat appeared in the street near the 7th lamp, stepping out from a gap between two houses with the fluid grace characteristic of felines. It was a gray cat, its fur striped with darker bands, and it moved with complete confidence and ownership of the space. The cat paused in the middle of the lane, directly beneath the 7th lamp, and sat down on the cobblestones, its tail curled neatly around its front paws. The cat sat very still, its eyes half closed, apparently content simply to rest in the circle of lamplight. Perhaps it was warming itself. The space directly beneath the lamp would be fractionally warmer than the surrounding areas, heated by the rising column of warm air from the flame. Or perhaps the cat was hunting, appearing relaxed but actually alert to any sound or movement that might indicate prey. Cats were like that, masters of stillness, able to wait with infinite patience for exactly the right moment to act. After several minutes, the cat stood, stretched luxuriously, and walked on down the lane, passing beneath the 8th lamp and then the 9th, moving with unhurried purpose toward the far end of the street. It did not hurry or hesitate, simply walked steadily onward, its paws silent on the stones, its form casting a small moving shadow that preceded it along the lamplight path. At the 10th lamp it paused again, sniffed at the herbs growing in their pot beside the step, and then continued to the 11th lamp and beyond, disappearing into the darkness of the fields, merging with the night so completely it was as if it had never been there at all. The street settled back into its empty stillness, the brief animation of the cat's passage already fading into memory, or into whatever passes for memory in the patient awareness of stones and lamps and sleeping houses. The night continued its slow progression, the hours passing with the same steady patience the lamps brought to their burning. 9 o'clock came and went, marked by the distant chiming of the clock that had sounded earlier, though fewer chimes reached Millbrook Lane now. Perhaps the wind had shifted, or perhaps the sound simply seemed fainter in the deeper stillness of the advancing night. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, turning slowly around the fixed point of the pole star. The ploughman had moved westward in his slow arc across the sky, and other constellations had risen in the east, the great square of stars that marked the body of the winged horse, and below it, the scattered points of light that formed the water-bearer. These names were human constructs, patterns imposed on random arrangements of distant suns, but they had served for generations to mark the seasons and the hours, to guide travelers and sailors, to provide familiar landmarks in the vast emptiness of the night sky. The lamplight could not reach these stars, separated as they were by distances too vast for human comprehension. But there was a kinship nonetheless between the small flames burning on Millbrook Lane and those immense fires burning across the gulf of space. Both were lights in darkness. Both marked the presence of something burning, something giving off energy and illumination. The scale was different beyond all measure, but the essential nature was the same, matter transformed by heat and chemistry into light, pushing back against the fundamental darkness of the universe. The cobblestones had released all their accumulated warmth now, their surface temperature matching the cool night air. If someone had walked barefoot along the lane, they would have found the stones distinctly cold against their feet, though not unpleasantly so, simply cool and solid and very much present. The stones had a kind of thermal honesty about them, absorbing heat when heat was available and releasing it when it was not, never pretending to be warmer or cooler than they actually were. Near the 2nd lamp, a small puddle had formed where water had run from somewhere, perhaps condensation from a drain pipe, or the remnant of water used to wash a step earlier in the day. The puddle was shallow and still, its surface mirror-smooth, reflecting the lamp above with perfect clarity. The reflection showed the lamp inverted, hanging upside down in the water, its flame pointing downward into imaginary depths. The image was so clear and precise that it seemed almost more real than the actual lamp, as if the puddle had captured some essential truth about the light and held it safe within its small boundaries. A moth returned, perhaps the same moth that had appeared earlier, or perhaps another drawn by the same instinctive attraction to light. This moth circled the 3rd lamp, flying in a loose spiral around the glass, never quite touching the surface but never moving very far away either. Its wings caught the light as it flew, becoming briefly translucent, showing the delicate structure of veins and membranes that gave them form and function. The moth's flight seemed erratic, almost desperate, driven by an urge it could not understand or resist, compelled to approach the light even though the light offered nothing the moth needed and nothing the moth could use. After a time, the moth flew higher, rising above the reach of the lamplight, disappearing into the darkness overhead. Perhaps it had finally overcome its attraction to the flame, or perhaps it had simply moved on to seek another light source. Either way, it was gone, leaving the lamp to burn on without witness, without audience, serving its purpose whether observed or not. The houses along the lane remained dark and silent, their residents deep in sleep now, their dreams unfolding in the private darkness behind their closed eyes. What did they dream of, these people of Millbrook Lane? Perhaps they dreamed of their daily concerns, work and family, hopes and worries, the small dramas and satisfactions of everyday life. Or perhaps they dreamed stranger dreams, the kind that come from deeper places in the mind, dreams of flying or falling, of being lost or found, of meeting people long dead or not yet born. Whatever their dreams, the sleepers were safe in their houses, protected by walls and roofs and locks, watched over by the faithful lamps burning in the street outside. The lamplighter had done his work, had brought light to Millbrook Lane as he brought it every evening, and the lamps would continue burning through all the hours of darkness, faithful to their purpose, constant in their vigil. The spider near the fourth lamp had caught something in its web, a small flying insect, perhaps a midge or a gnat, too small to identify with certainty in the lamplight. The web vibrated with the insect's struggles, and the spider moved quickly from its position at the center, following the vibrations to their source. The spider's movements were quick and efficient, wrapping its prey in silk, securing it for later consumption. Within moments, the struggling stopped, and the web hung still again, the spider returning to its central position, patient and motionless, ready to wait for the next victim. This small drama of predator and prey played out beneath the fourth lamp without notice or ceremony. It was simply the way of things, the natural order asserting itself in the small spaces between human awareness and human concern. The lamp illuminated the scene but did not judge it, did not favor hunter over hunted, simply provided the light by which both existed and by which their interaction could occur. The breeze that had stirred earlier had faded to almost nothing now, leaving the air nearly still. The lamp flames burned straighter, their wavering reduced to the barest minimum, so slight as to be almost imperceptible. The smoke from the flames rose in thin, straight columns through the ventilation slots at the tops of the lanterns, dissipating into the darkness above, invisible against the night sky. In the house beside the ninth lamp, a floorboard creaked as the building settled, the wood contracting slightly as the temperature dropped, releasing stresses that had built up during the warmth of the day. The sound was very soft, barely audible even inside the house, certainly not loud enough to reach the street or disturb any of the sleepers. It was simply one of the many small sounds that buildings make in the night, the quiet vocabulary of structures responding to temperature and humidity and the slight movements of the earth beneath their foundations. The beetle that had emerged earlier had completed whatever journey it had set out to make and had disappeared into another crevice between the cobblestones, returning to the hidden spaces beneath the street where such creatures made their homes. In those spaces, whole ecosystems existed, communities of insects and worms and microscopic life, all interacting in ways that went unseen and unconsidered by the humans who walked the street above. The cobblestones were not just a surface but a roof, covering a world beneath that functioned according to its own rules and rhythms. The 11th lamp continued its lonely vigil at the end of the lane, its light reaching out toward the fields but making little impression on that vast darkness. The boundary between town and country was not a sharp line, but rather a gradual transition, a zone where the influences of each overlapped and mingled. The lamp marked a point in that zone, a place where human order and wild nature met and acknowledged one another without conflict, each respecting the other's domain. Beyond that lamp, in the fields and hedgerows, the night creatures continued their activities. A fox moved along a familiar hunting route, its nose low to the ground, following scent trails invisible and incomprehensible to human senses. An owl lifted silently from a fence post, gliding on outstretched wings toward a rustle in the grass that might mean prey. Rabbits emerged from their burrows to feed on the grass, nervous and alert, ready to bolt at the slightest hint of danger. But these country activities did not intrude upon Millbrook Lane. The lane existed in its own sphere, its own carefully maintained environment of light and order and human presence. The lamps continued their burning, marking the hours not by intention but simply by their faithful persistence, their refusal to flicker out or fade or fail in their duty. The night deepened further still, moving past 9 o'clock toward 10, the hours accumulating slowly but steadily, each one adding its weight to the night, making the darkness feel more established, more permanent, though of course it was not permanent at all. Morning would come, as it always came, bringing its light and its activity and its resumption of daytime concerns. But that was hours away still, and for now, the night held dominion, and the lamps burned on in their patient attendance. The 10th hour approached and passed, the distant clock chiming its 10 notes into the stillness, the sound reaching Millbrook Lane like a gentle reminder that time continued its flow even in the deepest quiet of the night. The chimes faded one by one, absorbed by the darkness and the distance, until only the memory of sound remained, and then even that faded, leaving the lane wrapped once more in its profound and peaceful silence. The lamps burned on with their unchanging steadiness, neither brighter nor dimmer than they had been hours before when the lamplighter first lit them. The wicks consumed the oil at a constant rate, the flames maintaining their size and intensity with remarkable consistency. This was the result of good materials and proper maintenance, clean oil, trimmed wicks, well-designed lanterns that protected the flames while allowing proper ventilation. The lamplighter took pride in this consistency, in the way his lamps could be relied upon to burn steadily through the entire night without requiring any adjustment or intervention. The air had grown colder still, the temperature dropping as the earth released the last of its stored warmth into the clear night sky. Where the lamplight touched the cobblestones, faint wisps of vapor occasionally became visible. Not quite mist, not quite steam, but some transitional state between the two, a manifestation of temperature differences made visible for brief moments before dissipating again into invisibility. The stone fronts of the houses seemed to recede slightly in the lamplight, their surfaces taking on a quality that was somehow both more present and more distant than in daylight. The shadows cast by the window frames and doorways were sharper now, more defined, creating a sense of depth and dimension that transformed the familiar facades into something slightly mysterious, slightly other, though still completely themselves. Near the first lamp, at the entrance to the lane, a small snail had ventured out onto the cobblestones, leaving a faint trail of moisture behind it as it moved with its characteristic slow deliberation. The snail seemed unconcerned by the exposure of the open street, moving at its own pace towards some destination known only to itself. Its shell gleamed faintly in the lamplight, the spiral pattern catching and reflecting the warm glow, and the soft body beneath moved in its strange, muscular ripple, that method of locomotion so different from the legs and wings and fins of other creatures. The snail would take perhaps an hour to cross the width of the lane, moving from one side to the other at its patient, unhurried pace. Time meant something different to a snail, or perhaps time meant nothing at all. There was only the present moment, the current position, the slow progress toward the next position. The snail did not hurry and could not hurry, simply moved at the speed its body allowed, and that speed was what it was, neither fast nor slow in any absolute sense, simply appropriate to the creature making the journey. In the house beside the fifth lamp, a clock ticked quietly on a mantelpiece, its mechanism advancing second by second, the tiny sounds marking time's passage with metronomic precision. The clock could not be heard from the street. It was too quiet for that, its sounds contained within the walls of the house, but it continued its work nonetheless, counting the seconds and minutes and hours whether anyone listened or not, serving its purpose of measurement and marking even in the depths of the night when no one needed to know what time it was. The lamplight created patterns on the doors and windows of the houses, rectangles and squares of illumination that emphasized the geometry of the architecture. These patterns shifted very slightly as the flames moved, never completely still even in the absence of wind, responding to subtle currents of air and the natural variations in their burning. The patterns were hypnotic in their way, repetitive yet never quite identical, similar from moment to moment, but never exactly the same. A cloud passed across the stars, thin and high, barely visible against the darkness of the sky. It moved slowly from west to east, driven by winds that existed at altitudes far above the still air of the street. The cloud was not thick enough to obscure the stars completely. They showed through it dimly, their light softened and diffused but not extinguished. The cloud passed on, clearing the stars once more, continuing its slow journey across the night sky toward some distant destination. The seventh lamp, the one near the lavender bushes, seemed to glow with particular warmth and clarity. Perhaps its glass was fractionally cleaner than the others, or perhaps the angle of observation made it seem so, or perhaps there was no objective reason at all, simply a quality of perception, a momentary impression that the lamp seemed somehow more present, more insistent in its light. Whatever the reason, the lamp drew the eye, invited attention, seemed to offer something beyond mere illumination, though what that something might be remained undefined and indefinable. The houses breathed slowly in their way, not breath as living creatures breathe, but a kind of structural respiration, the expansion and contraction of materials responding to temperature changes, the slight movements of foundations settling, the creaking and groaning of wood and masonry adjusting to stress and strain. These movements were minute, measured in fractions of inches or less, but they were real, constant reminders that even seemingly solid and permanent structures were in fact dynamic systems, always in motion, always responding to the forces acting upon them. The beetle had emerged again from its hiding place, or perhaps it was a different beetle. There was no way to tell with certainty. It moved across the cobblestones near the eighth lamp, following some chemical trail or navigating by some sense that humans did not possess and could not understand. The beetle's path was not straight but rather angular, turning at seemingly random intervals, zigging and zagging across the stones in a pattern that made sense to the beetle itself, but appeared chaotic to any observer. After a time, the beetle found what it was seeking, a tiny fragment of something organic, perhaps a seed or a bit of leaf matter that had blown into the street from somewhere. The beetle investigated the fragment carefully, its antennae moving rapidly, and then began the work of consuming it, its mandibles working steadily to break down the material into pieces small enough to ingest. It was a small drama of finding and feeding, playing out beneath the lamp with no audience to observe or appreciate it. The puddle near the second lamp had grown slightly smaller, its edges receding as evaporation slowly claimed its water. The reflection of the lamp in the puddle grew slightly brighter as the water became shallower, concentrating the reflected light in a smaller area. Eventually the puddle would disappear entirely, but that would take hours still. The cool night air slowed evaporation considerably compared to the warmth of day. The spider in its web near the fourth lamp had consumed its prey and returned to its waiting position at the center of the web. The insect's body had been sucked dry, reduced to a hollow shell that the spider discarded, letting it fall from the web to the ground below. The web itself showed slight damage from the struggle, a few broken threads, a slight distortion in the perfect spiral, but the spider would repair these damages later, or perhaps spin an entirely new web, depending on the extent of the destruction and the spider's own assessment of whether repair or replacement made more sense. The 11th lamp burned on at the end of the lane, its light a steady beacon marking the edge of human settlement. Beyond it, the darkness of the field seemed deeper now, more complete, as if the night had grown more confident in its dominion, more assured of its temporary sovereignty over the landscape. The lamp did not challenge this darkness, but simply maintained its position, a point of light at the boundary, neither advancing nor retreating, simply holding its ground with quiet persistence. A shooting star traced a brief, brilliant line across the sky, a piece of cosmic debris burning up as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, its destruction creating a moment of beauty that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The streak of light was there and then gone, so quickly that someone watching might have doubted they had seen it at all. But it had been real, one more small event in the vast catalogue of events that constituted the night, noticed or unnoticed, significant or insignificant depending on one's perspective and criteria for significance. The lane rested in its lamplight, peaceful and still, wrapped in the gentle illumination that the lamplighter had so carefully provided. The hours past midnight moved with a different quality than the evening hours had possessed, slower somehow, more suspended, as if time itself had grown thick and viscous in the depths of night. The lamps burned on with their unchanging steadiness, their flames neither growing nor diminishing, simply maintaining their constant presence as the night stretched around them. The temperature had reached its lowest point now, the coldest hour of the night when the earth had released all the warmth it would release, and had not yet begun to receive the first hints of coming dawn. The air was crisp and still, carrying a clarity that made distant sounds seem closer, and near sounds seem sharp and distinct. Every small noise, the settling of a house, the scuttering of some small creature, the distant bark of a dog, carried with perfect clarity through the silence. The cobblestones had grown quite cold now, their surfaces holding a chill that would make them uncomfortable to touch with bare skin. Yet this coldness was not hostile or aggressive. It was simply the natural state of stone in the absence of warming sunlight, the baseline temperature to which all things returned when heat was no longer being actively supplied. The stones would warm again when the sun rose, beginning their daily cycle of absorption and release, but for now they rested in their coolness, patient and untroubled. Near the fifth lamp, a slight breeze stirred, barely more than a breath of moving air, but enough to carry with it the scent of wood smoke from some chimney in another part of town. Someone had kept their fire burning late, or perhaps had risen early to tend to a stove or hearth. The smell was pleasant and evocative, speaking of warmth and comfort and human presence even in the depths of the night. The breeze carried the scent along Millbrook Lane and then faded, leaving only the memory of smoke in the cool, clean air. The spider near the fourth lamp had abandoned its damaged web and was working on spinning a new one, attaching strands of silk to the lamp post and the nearby railing with methodical precision. The spider moved rapidly, its 8 legs working in coordination, paying out silk from its spinnerets and using its legs to position and secure each strand. The work would take hours, but the spider had nothing but time, no awareness of impatience or hurry, simply the instinctive drive to create the structure necessary for hunting. The new web was taking shape strand by strand, a framework first, and then the spiral of sticky silk that would actually capture prey. Each strand was placed with geometric precision, the spacing exact, the angles consistent. No one had taught the spider how to do this. The knowledge was built into its small body, encoded in whatever passed for a brain in creatures so small and simple. Yet the result was beautiful and functional, a work of engineering that would have challenged human architects to replicate without tools or measurement. In the house beside the eighth lamp, a light appeared briefly in a downstairs window. Just a flicker, there and gone almost immediately, perhaps someone lighting a candle to find their way to the kitchen for water, or to check on something they had remembered in the middle of the night. The light moved past the window and disappeared into the interior of the house, and after a few moments, a different window showed the same brief glow, the candle being carried from one room to another. Then that light too disappeared, and the house returned to darkness, the small nocturnal errand completed. The lane absorbed this brief interruption without reaction, simply continuing in its peaceful rest, untroubled by the momentary human presence. The lamps burned on, neither brighter nor dimmer for having witnessed the candle's brief passage. They had seen such things countless times, people rising in the night for 1,000 different reasons, lights appearing and disappearing in windows, small disturbances in the general pattern of nighttime sleep. These things were part of the rhythm of human habitation, familiar and expected, requiring no response or acknowledgement. A hedgehog emerged from beneath one of the houses, snuffling along the edge of the street with its nose close to the ground. The hedgehog moved with more purpose than the mouse had shown, following some trail of scent that promised food, insects, perhaps, or worms, or some other small creature that constituted the hedgehog's preferred diet. Its small feet scratched slightly on the cobblestones, and its breathing was audible as a soft snuffling sound, regular and unhurried. The hedgehog paid no attention to the lamplight, neither seeking it nor avoiding it, simply moving through it as through any other feature of the environment. Its spines caught the light as it moved, creating a slight halo effect around its body, hundreds of small points reflecting the warm glow of the nearest lamp. The creature was focused entirely on its search for food, its movements determined by smell and sound rather than sight, navigating the street through senses that operated independently of light or darkness. After a few minutes of investigation, the hedgehog found something, perhaps a beetle or a slug, something small and protein-rich that it consumed with quiet efficiency. Then it moved on, continuing its nocturnal foraging, eventually disappearing beneath a different house, retreating into whatever den or shelter it called home. The street was empty again, the hedgehog's visit already fading into the general catalogue of small events that constituted the night. The stars continued their slow wheel across the sky, constellations rising in the east and setting in the west, following paths that had been mapped and studied for thousands of years. The stars that the townspeople called the hunter was rising now, his belt of 3 bright stars marking his position, his sword hanging beneath the belt, his raised arm holding a club against some imagined enemy. These were patterns and stories humans had imposed on random arrangements of stars, narratives created to make sense of the vastness of the night sky, to find familiar shapes in the chaos of distant lights. The lamp at the midpoint of the lane, the 6th lamp, seemed to serve as a kind of anchor for the entire street, a central point around which the other lamps arranged themselves in their regular spacing. This was not objectively true, of course. Each lamp was equally important, each served its purpose with equal faithfulness. But there was something about the position of the 6th lamp, its location at the exact center of the lane, that seemed to give it a subtle significance, a quality of balance and centrality that the eye recognized even if the mind did not consciously acknowledge it. The snail had reached approximately the halfway point in its crossing of the lane, having progressed steadily through the hours since it first emerged. To the snail, this was neither an achievement nor a milestone. It was simply where the snail currently was, a position no different from any other position except that it happened to be the present one. The snail would continue moving until it reached the far side of the street, or until some obstacle or threat caused it to retreat into its shell, or until morning brought dangers that would send it seeking shelter in the crevices between the stones. The flame in the 3rd lamp flickered more noticeably than the others, responding to some slight variation in the oil supply, or perhaps to a small imperfection in the wick that was only now making itself apparent. The flicker was not concerning, the lamp would continue burning steadily through the night, but it gave that particular flame a slightly more animated quality, a sense of movement and life that the other, steadier flames lacked. The flickering created dancing shadows on the nearby wall, patterns of light and dark that shifted and changed from moment to moment. The houses stood solid and dark, their inhabitants deep in the restorative depths of sleep. Behind those walls, dreams were unfolding, some pleasant, some troubling, some merely strange. The sleeping mind processed the experiences of the day, sorting and filing memories, working through emotions and problems, sometimes arriving at solutions that the waking mind had failed to find. Sleep was not mere absence of consciousness, but rather a different kind of consciousness, active and purposeful in its own way. The 11th lamp maintained its position at the end of the lane, burning steadily in its isolation, marking the boundary between the ordered world of the town and the wilder world beyond. The lamp cast its light as faithfully as all the others, though fewer eyes would ever see it, fewer people would ever pass beneath it. The lamp's purpose was not determined by the number of observers or the frequency of use. It burned because it had been lit, and it would continue burning until it was extinguished, regardless of whether anyone noticed or appreciated its presence. A slight mist was beginning to form in the air, not thick enough yet to be called fog but more than mere dampness, a transitional state that made the lamplight slightly softer, slightly hazier, as if the air itself had gained some substance and texture. The mist would grow thicker as the night progressed toward morning, fed by the temperature differential between the cooling air and the still warm earth, until it formed a proper fog that would blanket the town in gray obscurity. But that was still some time away, and for now the mist was merely a suggestion, a hint of what was to come. The lane rested in its illuminated peace, the lamps burning faithfully, the night holding everything in its gentle embrace. The deepest hours of the night continued their slow passage, moving through that liminal time when night was most fully itself, when the evening seemed impossibly distant and the morning equally far away. The world had contracted to just this moment, this darkness, this patient waiting for the inevitable return of light. The lamps of Millbrook Lane burned on, their flames steady and true, measuring nothing, simply existing in their constant glow. The mist that had begun to form was thickening gradually, gathering in the cooler air near the ground, creating soft halos around each of the lamps. The light no longer traveled in clean, straight lines, but rather diffused through the moisture-laden air, creating spheres of gentle illumination that seemed to float above the street. The effect was dreamlike, softening all the hard edges of the architecture, making the lane seem less definite somehow, as if it existed partway between the real and the imagined. The cobblestones disappeared into the thickening mist, their individual shapes becoming less distinct, blending together into a general surface that seemed to extend indefinitely in all directions. The boundaries of the lane became less certain. The edges where street met building were obscured, hidden in the gray-white veil that was settling over everything. Only the lamp posts remained clearly visible, rising out of the mist like sentinels, their lights glowing warmly through the gathering haze. Near the first lamp, at the entrance to the lane, the mist was slightly less dense, thin perhaps by whatever faint movement of air came from the main street beyond. The lamp here burned with particular clarity, its light cutting through the mist more effectively than those further down the lane where the mist had gathered more thickly. The first lamp served as a beacon, marking the entrance to Millbrook Lane for anyone who might need to find it, though at this hour no one was abroad to need such guidance. The houses had vanished almost completely into the mist, their outlines suggested rather than clearly seen, their windows and doors mere darker patches in the general grayness. The solid, permanent buildings had become ghostly and uncertain, as if they might be there or might not, as if one could not quite trust what the eyes reported through the obscuring veil. Yet the houses were there, unchanged, merely hidden. The mist transformed perception but not reality. A sound reached the lane from somewhere in the distance, the cry of a fox, wild and eerie, carrying through the still, mist-laden air with startling clarity. The cry rose and fell, a sound that seemed to contain both pain and exultation, both loneliness and fierce independence. It was answered by another fox, further away, the two animals communicating across the darkness in their ancient language. The sounds faded, absorbed by the mist and the distance, leaving the lane wrapped once more in its profound silence. The spider working on its new web near the fourth lamp had made substantial progress, the framework complete now and the spiral nearly half finished. The strands of silk caught tiny droplets of moisture from the mist, transforming the invisible threads into visible lines of small, perfectly formed beads. The web became more apparent as the mist gathered on it, revealing its structure and beauty in a way that clear air never did. The spider continued its work, untroubled by the moisture, simply following its instincts to completion. The snail had progressed further across the lane, now perhaps 3/4 of the way from one side to the other. Its trail of moisture behind it had been obscured by the general dampness of the mist, no longer visible as a distinct path. The snail moved through the mist as it had moved through clear air, unaffected by the change, simply continuing its slow journey toward whatever destination motivated its crossing. The moisture in the air might actually have been beneficial to the snail, keeping its body from drying out, allowing it to travel more freely than it could in drier conditions. The lamp flames themselves were unaffected by the mist. The glass chambers protected them, keeping the moisture away from the wicks and oil, allowing them to burn as steadily as they had burned in clear air. Only the light they cast was changed, softened and diffused, made gentler by its passage through the moisture-laden atmosphere. The flames burned within their own small, clear spaces, islands of heat and dryness in the damp and cooling night. In one of the houses, a clock continued its patient ticking, marking seconds and minutes with mechanical precision. The sound could not be heard outside. The walls contained it, along with all the other small sounds of the sleeping household. But inside, the clock maintained its vigil, keeping track of time even though no one was awake to consult it, serving its purpose whether observed or not, faithful to its function in the darkness. The mist was thickest now near the far end of the lane, where Millbrook met the open fields. Here the moisture from the countryside met the slightly warmer air of the town, creating ideal conditions for fog formation. The 11th lamp was barely visible from the entrance to the lane, its light reduced to a soft glow suspended in the grayness, more suggestion than clear illumination. Yet it continued burning, faithful to its purpose, lighting a space that no human eye might see for hours yet. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, not the same dog that had barked earlier, or perhaps the same dog in a different location. The bark was repeated several times, regular and rhythmic, as if the dog were announcing something or challenging something, performing its duty as guardian and protector. After a minute or so, the barking ceased. Whatever had triggered it apparently resolved or departed. The silence returned, deeper and more complete for having been briefly broken. The temperature had stabilized at its nighttime low, no longer dropping, but not yet beginning the slow rise that would accompany the approach of dawn. This was the coldest hour, the time when the earth's heat was most fully depleted, when the night's chill reached its deepest point. Yet even now, far beneath the surface, the earth retained warmth, held heat in its deep rocks and soil, waiting to return that warmth when the sun rose again and the cycle of heating and cooling resumed. The beetle that had appeared earlier, or another beetle much like it, emerged again from between the cobblestones, climbing laboriously up onto the surface. The beetle's dark carapace was beaded with tiny droplets of moisture from the mist, making it glisten faintly in the lamplight. The beetle paused, perhaps orienting itself, perhaps simply resting, and then began to move, traversing the cobblestones with its characteristic deliberate pace. The beetle's journey had purpose, though what that purpose might be remained known only to the beetle itself. The 7th lamp, near the lavender bushes, cast its light across plants that were heavy now with moisture from the mist. The lavender's leaves and stems were covered in tiny droplets, each one catching and reflecting the lamplight, transforming the modest plants into something jeweled and precious. The herbal scent of the lavender was stronger in the mist, the moisture somehow releasing or amplifying the fragrance, so that the air near the 7th lamp carried a particularly pleasant smell, clean and refreshing and faintly sweet. The mist continued to thicken, moving past the stage of light fog into something denser and more substantial. Visibility was reduced to perhaps 30 or 40 feet. One could see the nearest lamps clearly enough, but those further away faded into vague glows in the grayness. The lane had become a smaller, more intimate space, its boundaries drawn in closer by the obscuring mist, the world reduced to just these few visible lamp posts and the immediate stretch of cobblestones between them. Yet despite the reduced visibility, there was no sense of threat or danger in the mist. It was simply weather, a natural phenomenon, neither hostile nor welcoming, merely present. The mist would lift when conditions changed, when the air warmed or when wind came to disperse it. Until then it would persist, transforming the familiar lane into something slightly mysterious, softening all the hard edges and clear definitions, making everything gentle and indistinct and peaceful. The lamps burned on through the mist, their light diffused but still present, still serving its purpose of illumination and guidance. The lamplighter, asleep in his cottage, could rest easy knowing that his work continued, that the lamps he had so carefully lit were burning faithfully through the night, through clear air and through mist, unchanging in their steady service to the sleeping town. The night moved slowly toward its final hours, though dawn was still distant, still hidden beyond the horizon. The mist lay thick over Millbrook Lane now, a soft blanket of gray that muffled sound and obscured vision, creating a world that felt both smaller and somehow more infinite, as if the lane existed in its own separate realm, disconnected from the larger town and the wider world beyond. The lamps continued their faithful vigil, each one a warm point of light suspended in the grayness. The glow from each lamp created a sphere of visibility, a small pocket of illuminated space that faded gradually into the surrounding mist. These spheres overlapped slightly where the lamps were close together, creating areas of brighter illumination, but much of the lane now existed in a softer, more diffused light, neither fully bright nor completely dark. The moisture in the air had begun to condense more noticeably on every surface. The lamp posts were slick with dampness, their black iron gleaming wetly in the light they supported. The cobblestones were covered with a film of water, not enough to form puddles but enough to make the surface reflective, so that each stone caught and held a bit of lamplight, creating a subtle constellation of small glows across the ground. The effect was beautiful in its quiet way, transforming the ordinary street into something more ethereal. The spider's web near the fourth lamp was complete now, a perfect spiral of silk stretched between the post and the railing. The web was made entirely visible by the moisture that had gathered on its strands, each thread outlined in tiny, perfect beads of water. The droplets caught the lamplight and scattered it, making the web seem to glow with its own internal light. The spider sat at the center of its creation, motionless and patient, waiting for morning and the insects that morning would bring. The snail had nearly completed its crossing of the lane, approaching now the far side where the cobblestones met the step of one of the houses. Its journey had taken hours, but time meant nothing to the snail. There was only the movement, the constant slow progress from one place to another, the patient advance across the vast distance of the street. Soon the snail would reach its destination, would climb the step or find shelter in some crevice, and its crossing would be complete. In the house beside the 10th lamp, a cat appeared in a window, its silhouette dark against the faint light within. The cat sat on the windowsill looking out at the misty street, its posture alert but relaxed, simply observing the night as cats do. Perhaps it watched the lamplight playing through the mist, or perhaps it saw things invisible to human eyes. The beetle moving across the stones, the last stages of the snail's journey, the small lives being lived in the shadows and spaces between human awareness. After a time, the cat turned away from the window and disappeared back into the darkness of the house. The window showed only emptiness again, a dark rectangle and a gray wall, the cat gone about whatever business cats attend to in the deep hours of the night. The lane accepted this brief observation without acknowledgement, simply continuing in its misty peace, unchanged by having been watched. The distant clock chimed twice, marking 2 o'clock with 2 clear notes that carried through the mist with surprising clarity. 2 o'clock, the night more than half over now, though the darkness showed no signs yet of thinning or weakening. The chimes faded into the mist and were gone, absorbed by the dampness and distance, leaving only their echo in memory, and then not even that. The mist had reached its maximum density now, thick enough that visibility was reduced to perhaps 20 feet or less. The 11th lamp at the end of the lane was no longer visible from the entrance. Its light existed only as a vague brightening in the general grayness, more sensed than seen. Each lamp had become isolated in its own small sphere of visibility, separated from its neighbors by walls of mist that suggested rather than revealed the presence of other lights beyond. Yet somehow this isolation was not lonely. Each lamp burned with the same faithful steadiness, unaware of and untroubled by its separation from the others. The lamps formed a chain of light along the lane, connected by purpose and position if not by direct visibility, each one serving its function, whether it could be seen from the others or not. The whole existed in the sum of the parts, even when the parts could not perceive the whole. A sound emerged from the mist, footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the direction of the main street. Someone was walking through the fog, moving carefully through the reduced visibility, their steps echoing softly on the damp cobblestones. The footsteps grew louder, nearer, and then a figure appeared at the entrance to the lane, materializing from the grayness like a ghost taking form. It was a constable, making his rounds, checking the streets and lanes to ensure all was well in the sleeping town. He walked slowly down Millbrook Lane, his steps measured and unhurried, his presence reassuring rather than alarming. The constable carried a small lantern of his own, though in the thick mist its light added little to the glow of the street lamps. He paused beneath each lamp, looking around, checking doors and windows, performing his duty with quiet thoroughness. At the third lamp, the constable stopped and pulled out a pocket watch, tilting it to catch the lamplight so he could read the time. He nodded to himself, satisfied with his progress, and returned the watch to his pocket. Then he continued on, passing beneath the fourth lamp where the spider waited in its web, beneath the fifth and sixth lamps at the midpoint of the lane, moving steadily toward the far end of the street. The constable's presence brought a different quality to the night, a reminder that even in the deepest hours, someone was awake and watchful, that the sleeping town was protected and tended. He represented human care and attention, the social contract that allowed people to rest peacefully in their homes, trusting that others kept vigil while they slept. At the 11th lamp, the constable paused again, looking out into the misty darkness of the fields beyond. He stood there for several minutes, perhaps listening for anything unusual, perhaps simply taking a moment to rest before beginning his return journey. The lamp cast its light on him from above, making him a solid, reassuring presence at the boundary between town and countryside, a human guardian marking the edge of human habitation. Finally the constable turned and began walking back up the lane, retracing his steps, passing beneath each lamp again in reverse order. His footsteps echoed in the mist, steady and calming, the sound of someone doing familiar work with competence and care. He reached the entrance to the lane, paused to make a note in a small book he carried, and then walked on, his footsteps fading into the distance, absorbed by the mist and the silence. The lane settled back into its emptiness, the constable's visit already becoming part of the night's catalogue of small events. The lamps burned on, unchanged by having been observed, simply continuing their faithful service. The mist held everything in its soft embrace, dampening sound, obscuring vision, creating a world that felt suspended somehow, removed from normal time and space. The beetle had found shelter again, disappearing into whatever crevice or gap it called home. The snail had completed its crossing and had climbed the step at the far side of the lane, finding refuge in the angle where step met wall, a place sheltered from traffic and predators. The spider waited in its web, its 8 legs spread to detect the slightest vibration that might signal prey. All the small creatures of the night had settled into their positions, waiting for whatever the remainder of the darkness might bring. The houses stood silent and still, their residents deep in sleep, unaware of the constable's passage, unaware of the thickness of the mist, unaware of anything except their dreams and the slow restoration that sleep provided. Behind those walls, lives continued in suspension, held safe by darkness and rest, preparing unconsciously for the return of day and the resumption of waking activities. The lamp flames burned steadily within their glass chambers, small fires that would persist through all the remaining hours of darkness, faithful and constant, asking nothing, simply giving their light freely to the empty, misty street. The night moved into its final hours, though the darkness showed no signs yet of weakening. The mist continued to blanket Millbrook Lane in its soft obscurity, holding everything in a gentle suspension, wrapping the street in gray silence. The lamps burned on with their unchanging patience, their flames steady behind the protective glass, their light diffused through the moisture-laden air into soft, glowing spheres. Time passed slowly, unmeasured except by the occasional distant chiming of clocks and the imperceptible turning of the stars behind their veil of mist and cloud. 3 o'clock came and went, marked by 3 faint chimes from somewhere in the town. The sound reached Millbrook Lane as if from a great distance, muffled and dreamlike, more memory than actual perception. The chimes faded and the silence returned, deeper than before. The cobblestones lay quiet beneath their film of moisture, cool and still, holding the night's accumulated dampness. Each stone was a small island, distinct from its neighbors yet part of the continuous surface of the street. The stones had witnessed countless nights like this one, had felt the touch of countless fogs and mists, had supported the weight of generations of footsteps. They would witness countless more nights, patient and enduring, changing so slowly that change was imperceptible, wearing down so gradually that each night might as well be eternal. The first lamp at the entrance to the lane continued its steady burning, its light reaching through the mist as well as it could, marking the beginning of the street for anyone who might need to find it. Though no one came, the street rested empty, visited only by small creatures and dampness and the patient progression of hours toward dawn. Near the second lamp, a new puddle had formed, created by condensation dripping from a drain pipe. The puddle grew slowly, 1 drop at a time, each drop arriving with a soft sound, a tiny percussion marking time in a way more intimate and immediate than any distant clock. The puddle reflected the lamp above, creating a mirror image that wavered slightly with each new drop, the reflected flame dancing while the real flame burned steady and true. The houses remained dark and silent, their occupants still deep in sleep. In some rooms, people were beginning the slow drift upward toward waking, their sleep becoming lighter as their bodies prepared for the approach of morning. But they were not yet awake, not yet conscious, simply moving through the later stages of the sleep cycle, their dreams becoming more vivid and more easily remembered as their minds approached the threshold of consciousness. The third lamp stood before the house with the blue-gray door, casting its light across the faded paint, bringing out subtle variations in color that daylight might not reveal. The lamp had no preferences, no judgments about what it illuminated. It simply provided light, allowing the eye to see whatever was there to be seen. The door, the step, the worn stones, all received the same neutral, faithful illumination. The spider in its web near the fourth lamp remained motionless at the center of its creation, exhibiting patience that transcended human understanding. The spider could wait hours, days if necessary, simply maintaining its position at the web's hub, ready to respond instantly to any vibration that might indicate prey. There was no boredom in this waiting, no impatience or frustration, simply the endless present moment, repeated continuously until something changed. The fourth lamp's flame still showed that slight flicker it had developed earlier, giving it a quality of animation that the other flames lacked. The flicker was small but constant, a tiny irregularity that made the flame seem somehow more alive, more present. The dancing shadows it created moved across the nearby wall, subtle patterns that shifted and changed in rhythms too complex to predict or describe. The fifth lamp stood before the house where the elderly woman lived, though she slept now as soundly as any of her neighbors, her age making no difference to the depth of her rest. The lamp lit her doorstep, her window, the small portion of wall that formed her home's public face. The lamp had lit this same spot for years, would light it for years more, constant and faithful in its nightly service. At the sixth lamp, the midpoint of the lane, the mist seemed slightly thinner, or perhaps that was only an illusion created by the lamp's position at the center of the street. The light here seemed to reach further, to penetrate more deeply into the grayness, creating a larger sphere of visibility. Or perhaps the sixth lamp simply seemed more significant because of its central location, drawing the eye and the mind to it as a point of reference and balance. The seventh lamp cast its light across the lavender plants, their leaves still heavy with moisture, their scent still strong in the damp air. The lamplight made each droplet of water visible, transforming the simple plants into something jeweled and beautiful. Beauty was not the lamp's purpose, illumination was its purpose, but beauty resulted nonetheless, a byproduct of light interacting with water and living green things. The eighth lamp at the widened place in the lane stood beside the old pump, both of them silent witnesses to the night. The pump's iron handle gleamed wetly in the lamplight, its surface beaded with condensation. The pump had served the lane for decades, had provided water for countless households before indoor plumbing made it obsolete. Yet it remained, a monument to an earlier time, still functional, still capable of performing its original purpose if called upon to do so. The ninth lamp stood before the house with the lion's head knocker, the brass gleaming dully through the mist. The lamplight caught the details of the lion's face, its mane, its fierce expression, the ring held in its mouth. The knocker had announced countless visitors, had sounded against the door in greeting and farewell, in urgency and in leisure. Now it hung silent in the night, waiting for the return of day and human activity. The 10th lamp illuminated the herbs in their pot, the rosemary and thyme still present though dormant, their growth slowed by darkness and cool temperature. The plants waited patiently for the return of sunlight, for the warmth that would allow them to resume photosynthesis and growth. They had waited through countless nights, would wait through countless more, patient in the way that only plants can be patient, rooted in place, accepting whatever conditions arrived. The 11th lamp stood at the end of the lane, burning its faithful flame at the boundary between town and countryside. Beyond it, the fields lay invisible in darkness and mist, their vastness suggested but not revealed. The lamp marked the edge, the limit, the point where human order gave way to natural wildness. The lamp made no judgment about this boundary, did not prefer town to country or country to town, simply maintained its position and offered its light to whatever and whoever might need it. The night began its slow transformation toward morning, though the change was imperceptible at first, more a shift in quality than in any measurable attribute. The darkness remained complete, the mist remained thick, yet something was different, some subtle alteration in the texture of the night that suggested the approach of dawn, though dawn was still an hour or more away. For a clock passed, marked by 4 distant chimes that seemed fainter than before, as if the night were reluctant to acknowledge the counting down of its remaining hours. The chimes faded quickly, leaving no trace, and the silence returned, profound and complete. The lamps burned on, their flames as steady as they had been at dusk, at midnight, at any hour of the long night. The oil in their reservoirs was lower now, consumed by hours of burning, but still sufficient for the time remaining before the lamplighter would return to extinguish them. The wicks were slightly shorter, their tips blackened by use, but still capable of drawing oil and sustaining flame. Everything continued to function as designed, reliable and true. The street rested in its illuminated peace, wrapped in mist and darkness, tended by the faithful lamps. The night held everything gently, asking nothing, simply providing the darkness necessary for rest and restoration. Behind the doors and windows, people slept on, their breathing slow and steady, their bodies and minds recovering from the day's efforts, preparing for the day to come. The mist would begin to lift eventually, when the air warmed with approaching dawn. The stars would fade as the sky brightened. The darkness would retreat, reluctant but inevitable, yielding to the return of light. The people would wake and begin their days, opening doors and windows, filling the street with sound and movement and purpose. But that was still ahead, still waiting in the future. For now, the night continued, and the lamps burned steadily, and Millbrook Lane rested in perfect peace. The 11th lamp glowed softly at the end of the street, completing the chain of light that stretched back to the entrance, each lamp fulfilling its purpose, each flame burning true. The lamplighter's work was complete and perfect. The street was lit. The town was safe. The night was tended and watched and gently illuminated. Everything was as it should be, calm and quiet and deeply, profoundly restful. The lamps burned on through the final hours of darkness, faithful and patient, asking nothing, simply giving their light freely to the sleeping world. The flames would continue burning until morning came, and then they would be carefully extinguished, their work complete, their duty fulfilled. But until then they burned, steady and true, warm and constant, faithful through all the long, quiet hours, the street glowing softly in complete calm, the night holding everything in stillness, rest settling over all things like a gentle blessing, the lamps burning on, and on, and on, the end.